Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something really central to finance, though maybe a bit behind the curtain. Know your customer. You know KYC. We've got a great source here from FinCrime Intelligence to help us navigate it. So our mission really is to unpack what KYC actually is, why it's so critical, basically non-negotiable these days, and, get into the different layers involved, pull out the key stuff from the source for you.
Yeah, and fundamentally, our source defines KYC as basically a set of due diligence steps, procedures that financial institutions use. It's how they check customer identities and, crucially, assess the risks tied to them. The article really emphasizes it as a cornerstone of anti-money laundering, AML efforts.
Okay, cornerstone. Sounds important, obviously,
But it
but
has to.
is it just about regulations ticking boxes, or is there something, deeper driving it?
Well, the source is pretty clear. It's much more fundamental than just compliance. KYC is a core control mechanism. It's the way institutions verify who they're dealing with, individuals, yeah, but also complex companies. And like you said, it's really about getting a handle on that customer's risk profile. Things like, okay, where's their money coming from? What's their business, their job? Who really owns the company? Where in the world are they operating? Knowing all that helps them spot when activity seems off,
Mm.
suspicious because it doesn't fit the picture they have. Fundamentally, it's designed to keep out anonymous actors, really high-risk entities, or anyone on a sanctions list, stop them getting into the legitimate system in the first place. And yes, absolutely, regulations are a huge driver. The source mentions the big ones: FATF standards globally, EU AML directives, the U.S. Bank Secrecy Act, UK money laundering regs. They all push for this.
Right, so it's like the first line of
For
defense.
gatekeep, exactly that. The source directly says a well-designed KYC program is key to detecting and preventing a whole bunch of financial crime. We're talking money laundering,
Right.
fraud, yeah, corruption, tax evasion, even terrorist financing. So you connect the dots. KYC isn't just paperwork. It's a foundational defense protecting the integrity of the whole financial system.
That makes sense. Okay, the why is clear, but how do they actually do it? What does this KYC process look like day to day, according to the source?
Okay, so the article breaks it down into a few core components.
Hmm.
First up is the Customer Identification Program, or the CIP. This is the initial step, verifying identity using reliable, independent sources, your passport, driver's license. For a business, maybe it's incorporation documents,
Just proving, yep, this person is who they claim to be. Basic identity check.
pretty much. Then, once identity is confirmed, comes customer due diligence, or CDD. This is where they gather more info. It's about understanding the nature of the customer's business or activities, their source of wealth, what kind of transactions to expect. And a really key part here is understanding beneficial ownership, figuring out who really owns or controls a company or trust, even if it's hidden behind, layers of legal structures.
Ah, okay. So CDD is understanding what they do and who's really pulling the strings behind it.
Precisely. Building that profile of their financial life. Now, if a customer seems potentially higher risk, there's another level: enhanced due diligence, EDD. And this goes deeper. It means more digging. Things like screening for adverse media, basically, bad press or public info, linking them to maybe illicit stuff. It might mean extra verification steps or a much closer look at their business model and transactions.
Wow. Okay. So EDD isn't just filling out another form. It sounds more like a focused me investigation almost, based on how risky they seem.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, it's a risk-based escalation. And it's not a one-and-done thing either. There's also ongoing monitoring. This means regularly reviewing customer activity, checking transactions against their profile and risk level. The source mentions triggers for this, like unusual transaction patterns, maybe a sudden change in company ownership, or if the customer pops up on a new sanctions list update. So these four things: CIP, CDD, EDD, that ongoing monitoring, they form the kind of dynamic core of KYC.
Okay, you mentioned enhanced due diligence, the EDD, for high-risk customers. Who actually tends to fall into those categories? What does the source say requires that extra level of scrutiny?
Right. So the article points out several common profiles that usually trigger EDD. First, politically exposed persons, PEPs. These are people in or who've held public office, government officials, senior executives in state-owned companies, that kind of thing, plus their close associates and family.
Yep.
The risk there is potential corruption,
That
right?
makes sense.
Then you've got offshore companies or trusts, especially if their ownership structure is really complex or opaque,
Hmm.
because that complexity can be used to hide who really owns the money or assets.
Right, hiding the beneficial owner.
Exactly. Also, businesses that naturally handle a lot of cash, Think casinos, money transmitters, check cashers, those kinds of money services, businesses, MSBs. They often get closer scrutiny. Non-resident customers or businesses operating across lots of different countries can be higher risk just due to the complexity and differing rules. And of course, customers based in or dealing with countries that international bodies like FATF or national regulators have flagged as high risk or subject to sanctions. The source really stresses that the KYC approach needs to be flexible, tailoring the checks based on these specific risks.
And underpinning all of this, these different levels of checks and risk ratings are those big global regulations you touched on earlier.
Yes, absolutely. They provide the framework and the teeth. The source specifically mentions the global FATF standards setting the baseline. Then you have EU AML directives really pushing for identity verification and knowing the beneficial owners. In the U.S., there's the FinCEN CDD rule, which explicitly mandates identifying those beneficial owners, and the UK's money laundering regulations largely echo these principles. And the article is quite blunt about what happens if institutions get this wrong. It talks about serious consequences, massive fines, regulatory smackdowns, having business restricted, and major reputational damage.
It definitely sounds like a huge complex task, managing all these different risks and customer types. But the source does mention technology is really changing the game here. What kind of innovations are helping out?
Oh, absolutely. Technology is crucial. It's aiming to make KYC faster, more accurate, and hopefully a bit less painful for the actual customer, too. The source highlights things like digital identity verification using biometrics, facial recognition, even just scanning documents automatically. There are specialized platforms now, eKYC platforms, designed to streamline the whole onboarding process digitally, and machine learning, AI that's being used for much smarter customer risk scoring, spotting weird patterns in transactions that a human might miss, and keeping those customer profiles up to date almost automatically.
Dynamic profiles, okay.
Yeah. Blockchain even gets a mention, as a potential way down the line to securely share verified ID info between institutions, with customer permission, of course.
Yeah.
And something called natural language processing, NLP. That's really important for sifting through massive amounts of text data like news articles, social media, public records to find those adverse media hits we mentioned earlier. All this tech is vital for making KYC actually scalable and allowing for near real-time checks, which is essential when threats move so fast.
You'd think with all that tech, maybe KYC problems would be solved. But the source is pretty realistic, right? It says, look, it's important, tech helps, but there are still major challenges. What are the big hurdles?
Yeah, the article definitely acknowledges the practical difficulties. Data quality is a massive one. Customer info might be incomplete, inconsistent, just plain wrong, or stuck in different computer systems, maybe even different countries. And believe it or not, some places still rely on manual, paper-based steps, which is obviously slow and prone to errors.
Wow, really?
It still happens.
That's rude.
Then there's the issue of screening systems, generating false positives. Flagging perfectly legitimate customers by mistake. That creates a ton of extra work and really annoys the customer.
I can imagine.
Customer friction is a constant battle. Make the KYC process too cumbersome, ask for too much upfront, and people might just walk away, especially if they're trying to sign up online. And finally, rules aren't the same everywhere. Regulatory divergence, different countries having slightly different requirements makes it really tough for global institutions to have one consistent process. The source does mention ways firms try to tackle these, like building centralized data hubs, using smarter analytics to cut down false positives, and doing better risk segmentation so low-risk customers have an easier time.
It's definitely a balancing act, isn't it? Security versus convenience. So, stepping back, what's the big takeaway? How does the source position KYC overall? Is it just a cost of doing business, a regulatory burden?
Well, the source argues strongly that it's much more than that. It frames KYC as a strategic asset, really. It's presented as a fundamental control that feeds into the institution's entire approach to managing enterprise risk management. When you integrate KYC properly with your other systems, your AML transaction monitoring, your sanction screening, your fraud detection, even just your basic customer relationship management, it lets you make much smarter decisions about who you do business with. It's about understanding the customer before something goes wrong.
Proactive, not just reactive.
Exactly. That allows institutions to spot potential threats earlier, react faster if a customer's risk profile changes, and ultimately reduce their exposure both to regulatory fines and to reputational harm. And, if done well and efficiently, it can actually make operations smoother in the long run.
So it's really about building institutional intelligence on your customer base to manage risks smartly, protecting the whole business, not just satisfying a regulator.
Precisely. And the source concludes on that note, basically saying that having robust, adaptable KYC systems isn't just, nice to have. It's essential. It's vital for protecting individual firms and ultimately the integrity of the whole global financial system, especially as financial crime keeps getting more sophisticated.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground on KYC today. We've looked at what it is, why it's so vital as a defense against financial crime, unpacked those core components, CIP, CDD, EDD, and that ongoing monitoring piece. We identified some of those high-risk groups, touched on the regulations driving it all, saw how tech is stepping in to help, but also acknowledged the real-world challenges that still exist. It really comes across as a core strategic defense.
Yeah, and understanding this, even just broadly, gives you, the listener, some insight into why financial institutions ask for the information they do. The documents, the questions about your job or source of funds. It highlights this ongoing complex effort behind the scenes to shield the financial system from the bad stuff the source mentioned, money laundering, fraud, terrorist financing, all of that.
It does make you think, though, considering those challenges the source brought up, especially that tension between tight security and a smooth customer experience, plus the patchwork of rules globally. And then you layer on the potential of tech like digital IDs and smarter AI. How is this global effort to identify customers and manage risk going to evolve? What does the source suggest about that future tug of war between security, convenience, and global consistency? Something to definitely keep an eye on.